I'm getting this question asked on social media by people who don't live in Georgia. What did Brian Kemp do differently from other states? And I want to spend a moment here and talk to people who aren't in Georgia about what Georgia did, because it really didn't do a lot, except it did. I want to compare and contrast really Ron DeSantis and Brian Kemp. And Ron DeSantis has gotten a terrible rap from a lot of reporters, and the reason has nothing to do with his behavior in Florida. It has everything to do with the fact they're fearful of him running for president in 2024. And as a result, they've set out to define Ron DeSantis as a failure when, in fact, Florida has done better than New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California, and a bunch of other states in terms of the virus. He's gotten a lot of national exposure. Brian Kemp hasn't. He's flown under the radar to the extent that Brian Kemp has gotten national exposure. It's been, for example, the New York Times has a story that Donald Trump intends a very special place in hell for Brian Kemp and intends to ruin him and his political career and target him. I don't know that it'll do him any good, but he's going to try. But because Kemp has not gotten a lot of national attention, let me explain to people outside of Georgia exactly what Georgia did that may or may not have been different from your states. One of the things, excuse me, that Kemp did is he shut down the state for just 1 month. He waited until all the public health officials. Now there were local officials begging him to shut down the state sooner than he did. In fact, the Democrats to this day say he should have shut the state down and kept it shut down longer. He waited until public health officials told him he had no choice. Originally, he wanted every region of the state. The state of Georgia is divided into healthcare regions. And he wanted each region to come up with a plan for fighting the virus in its region. But as the virus spilled over beyond regions, finally everyone said, you got to shut it down. So he shut the state down. The only things that were allowed to remain open were grocery stores, banks, pharmacies, and gas stations. Everything else was shut down. After a month, the governor began to reopen the state. And he reopened the state and he issued very specific guidelines that businesses had to follow in terms of hand washing or hand sanitation, in spacing in restaurants and capacities, a slow roll over time to get them fully reopened. And one of the things he did is he said to all the businesses, the state of Georgia is not going to define which businesses are essential and not essential, because if you're a small business owner, your business is essential to your livelihood. So we're not going to, now that we've shut everybody down for a month and we reopen, we're not going to keep you shut down. He reopened in phases, keeping bars and restaurants and music halls and venues the last to reopen, but did a slow rolling reopen of the state. And when he reopened the state, what he also did was campaign around the state saying no mandates for you, no mask mandates, none of this stuff. But we're going to try to tell you what you got to do. And if you're a business, you got to follow these guidelines to reopen. And once you reopen, we're going to enforce the guidelines. But to individuals, we're going to tell them how to keep themselves safe, and we're not going to force it upon them. So if you were a small business and you felt like you needed to reopen for your livelihood, you could reopen. But if you did, you were going to have to provide hand sanitizer. You were going to have to space people out. You were going to have to limit capacity. And if you were an individual, we weren't going to, as a state, impose a mask mandate on you, but we were going to tell you, if you go in public, put a mask on. Now, ultimately, the governor caved to the city of Atlanta and other cities and allowed them to impose mask mandates, but said he wasn't going to enforce them. And the state has gone around, the governor has gone around, and he's toured every corner of the state of Georgia on press tours on a weekly basis. And he tells people, mask up, wash your hands, and keep your distance. Stay home if you can. We're not going to enforce you. We're not going to throw you in jail for not doing it, but this is what you need to do. And this message everywhere. Every time he comes on this radio program now, he ends by saying, everybody have a great day, and remember, wear a mask, wash your hands, keep your distance. And he's practicing what he preaches. Now, beyond that, he went into Hispanic communities in the state. And instead of trying to go in as the white Southern governor, he got Hispanic leaders from the local community to go in on his behalf and say, in Spanish, here's what you need to do. Here's the virus is spreading. Here's how to keep yourself, your family, and your community safe. Wash your hands, keep your distance, wear a mask, limit crowd capacity size. If you have any symptoms, go get tested. He did his best to ramp up testing. He brought in private vendors to help when the state was overflowing. When the state capacity was wound down and it was the private vendors who were overflowing, the state helped handle their capacity. It wasn't perfect. There are a lot of people who criticized him, but overall it worked. And it had more to do with education. And then the state allowed schools to reopen, and a lot of metro schools in the Atlanta area did not reopen, and a lot of private schools did. And when they reopened, the state provided them a lot of guidelines to help them reopen, gave them ideas on how to reopen, and most importantly, kept the flow of information going. Now, there are a lot of people who complain, well, I can't get them on the phone. Well, the reason you can't get them on the phone is because they're on the phone with other people constantly. So the state of Georgia did not shut down a second time. In fact, the governor pointed out 2 weeks ago, he was asked at a press conference, why won't the state shut down again when there's so much virus? And he said, well, states that have shut down and have mask mandates that they're enforcing are actually doing worse per capita than we are. And his whole idea, his whole strategy was that individuals are going to save themselves, not the state. In his State of the State address last week, he had a great line talking about Albany and the suffering Albany faced when the virus hit there first. That it wasn't the government who solved the problem. It was individuals in the community working as a community came together and solved the problem. The government's not going to pick and choose winners and losers. It's not going to decide which businesses are essential and not essential. It's just going to tell people, do these things, and you'll keep the virus at bay. He's advocated schools reopening. A lot of the metro Atlanta schools won't reopen despite him advocating it. A lot of private schools have, and the private schools are picking up the excess. One of the things private schools are doing is they're stepping up to allow poor kids in the metro Atlanta area to come into the schools using the Opportunity Scholarship Fund in the state. And so the state of Georgia, without flash, without a lot of media attention, now has the lowest viral transmission rate in the nation. In fact, the viral transmission rate is receding faster in Georgia than any other state. There are a lot of competing factors for this, but a lot of it has to do with the state leadership, and a lot of that has to do with Brian Kemp, who never mandated, never shut businesses down except for that month. And when he shut down that month, it was solely to stockpile resources. And after stockpiling the resources, they then set up a coordinating center where all the hospitals of the state have to participate. And if you've got in Southeast Georgia a group of hospitals that have an excess of ventilators that they don't need, and North Georgia does, Kemp sends the National Guard to pick up those ventilators and send them to North Georgia. And they redistribute, they keep track of them, where they're going, so they can get them back to the right place when they no longer need them. But they're trying their best to reallocate resources around the state, monitor hospital capacity, know which hospitals have ICU capacity, which ones don't, shuffle patients around as needed to make sure that no one is maxed out in resources. There was no show, there was no flash, there was none of that, and it's worked. And the data speaks for itself now. According to the Federal Reserve, Georgia's taxpayers, Georgia's citizens lost less in their paycheck than any other state. According to the Federal Reserve, Georgia is rebounding economically faster than every other state. According to the RT.Live website, Georgia's rate of transmission is the lowest in the nation. And all of these things have to do with the leadership that did not seek to impose on people, did not seek to mandate to people, but just sought to communicate and make sure everyone else was talking with each other. You know, Kemp, early on in this, came on this program and talked to me and said that one of the big issues was communication, that we needed open lines of communication between everyone because this was going to be a team effort. And that was his number one goal. And he has reached that goal. And the result is a state that is actually doing far better when it comes to the virus than a whole lot of other states. And I really do think he deserves a lot of credit for that.